Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday to you. I'm Catherine Joyce, Executive Director of the North Carolina Association of School Administrators, and I am pleased that you are all joining us this morning for the first in NCASA's spring and summer webinar series that is free to all of our members. We appreciate your taking time, especially last minute, to join this webinar. We only planned it a day ago. And so having you join us for this Friday session is very exciting for us. We are bringing you some good news today about what's in Governor Roy Cooper's state budget proposal for the next 2 years that he just released a couple of days ago. And after we saw the content of that budget, we knew you would want to hear about it too. So we worked with the governor's office to put this together quickly and are excited that you can listen in this morning and maybe get some of your questions answered right at the end. So let's get our program started because we do have a lot to share today. First, I want to say we have some great sponsors who are helping to make this webinar possible this morning. We have Audio Enhancement and Education Elements. Both of these are NCASA's Leadership Alliance partners, and they are sponsoring today's event for us, so thank you to them. Just a few logistics for you this morning. All of you will remain in listen-only mode, but you can submit questions that we're going to be addressing at the end of the webinar. We ask that if you have questions that you use the Q&A box for those, which will make it easier for us to see which have been answered and which have not. If you have technical questions or need to communicate with our NCASA team, then use the chat feature for that. Or if you just want to make comments, you can use the chat feature as well. But content questions, please use the Q&A. After the webinar, you will be emailed a brief evaluation. It always helps us see if we're offering information that is relevant and beneficial for our members. So please look for that. That will come in your inbox. And because this is the first in a 10-part series of free webinars this spring and summer, this will earn you some CEU certificate credit. And I believe that's 0.1 hours. So that will help you build. If you attend several of our free webinars, you would get one full CEU unit at the end of the whole series later this summer. So all of that will be coming your way. And if you have questions on that, then our team is here to help on that as well. So moving right along, our agenda for this morning, we're going to start early today with just a brief background overview about the Leandro school funding litigation, which is still before the courts. And there was recently a plan for implementation of how to put the state in compliance with the rulings from that long-running Leandro case that recently went to the court. And we wanted you to have some background on that because Governor Cooper's budget draws heavily on that implementation plan. So that is some of the information you'll be getting today. Sharing that will be Elizabeth Yelverton, who is NCASA's Legal Affairs and Policy Manager. Following Elizabeth, we'll hear from the governor's senior education advisor, Geoffrey Coltrane, who was gracious to quickly help us put this together today. And then at the very end, we're going to be handling our Q&A based on what you submit to us in the Q&A box during this webinar. So let's dive right in. And now we're going to hear a word from our first sponsor, Audio Enhancement.
In a new report, the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends masks for all kids.
The CDC just put out guidelines for when classrooms finally reopen. On the list, wearing masks.
Last March, we put cloth on our faces for disease prevention purposes, and that's a good thing. but a mask does in some ways make it harder to hear and understand what people are saying.
60 to 70% of all learning is auditory. The teacher talking to the students is the primary method of data getting into those students' brains. Most of the really critical frequencies for learning and understanding are in the higher frequencies. So there's a definite impact on speech in the classroom because of the masks.
And it's hard for teachers to use an elevated voice for an extended period of time.
Think about the kids in a classroom where the teacher seems like they're constantly yelling, even though they're really not. They're just trying to amplify their voice.
Because you want to reach the student that's sitting in the back of the classroom.
30 kids in here, it's not fair for the ones in the far corners not to hear me as well as the ones in the front.
They've all come to the same results. Masks impede the ability of the teacher to communicate effectively with their students.
We wanted some way to overcome that, to put in a sound system that worked.
With the tools that audio enhancement has provided for us, it doesn't matter that we have to wear masks. Everything that happens in the classroom is not inhibited.
Our teachers wear microphones around their necks to amplify their voices so that no matter where they are in the classroom, students hear their voices as if they are standing in a close proximity to them.
It's really hands-off for our teacher. The microphone's right there, on, off, mute, pause.
It allows the teachers to be heard through the microphone that's on their chest, and it gives everybody the same audio experience throughout the whole class.
Teachers can just talk in a conversational manner without really straining and trying to project that voice, and the audio enhancement system does the rest for them.
It's been amazing that I know that they can hear me clearly, particularly with the masks.
When I turn this on, look what happens. All of a sudden, when I talk, my voice is projected throughout the entire room. The students can hear me clearly.
It's not just about, did I hear the word the teacher said, but did I hear it in the way the teacher intended it to be said?
And you make the stories that you tell far more exciting and far more dramatic, so they hear a lot more depth, a lot more tone. And so I can do anything normally. The mic picks it up, and then we can go from there.
Having the ability that audio enhancement has given us, we've been able to give our students every opportunity to keep us ahead of the curve.
We're hearing it from the teachers who had the audio systems before and after the masks. It made a difference before. Now with the mask, it makes an even bigger difference to what they're doing.
Yes, I hope I never have to go a full day of teaching without it.
So thank you to Audio Enhancement. And I think now we're going to hear a word from one of their leaders, Patrick Sobak. Patrick, thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for jumping on here I heard it was short notice, so we appreciate it. Happy Friday. I wanted to show that video for kind of two reasons. One is you're hearing from your peers on how classroom audio and sound amplification can help students and teachers across all levels, kindergarten through high school. And the other big important piece of that is, you're going to talk about budgets and equity across school districts, right? So this is something that can be put in every classroom across an entire district where it's going to help kindergarten to 12th grade. And also it puts you down a path with our products, audio enhancement. We have a couple other components. If you're ever looking to do an intercom system or classroom safety or classroom cameras, all of that ties into that sound amplification piece that would be in they were talking about in that video. So again, I appreciate everyone's time today, and thank you, and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for some relevant supports for our school districts at this crazy time of the pandemic. Fantastic work. Okay, so now we're going to move right into the program, and it is my pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Yelverton, our Legal Affairs and Policy Manager, to talk a bit about the Leandro case. Elizabeth?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Yelverton. As Catherine said, I'm the Legal Affairs and Policy Manager for the School Administrators Association. And I just wanted to start us off today with a little bit of background on the Leandro case. And you might be thinking, well, I thought I was tuning in for a update on the governor's budget. Why are they throwing a law exam at me this morning? And that's because Leandro has become so intertwined with our state funding system and our plans for funding the state moving forward that I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background because this is a decades running case. And a lot of times we throw Leandro around without really thinking about what exactly that means. And as Catherine mentioned, the governor has or is trying to implement a lot of the Leandro recommendations in his budget proposal that Jeff is going to talk with you about in a few minutes. So let's get started. As you all know, in 1994, 5 counties sued the state and the State Board of Education, arguing that their students were not receiving sufficient education. And so these were 5 relatively lower income school districts, and they sued the state because they were saying that they were in a position where they could not provide a sufficient education to their students without any other supplemental funding from the state. They just weren't competing with the more wealthier districts, and so they sued the state. The North Carolina Supreme Court ruled that every child has a state constitutional right to a sound basic education. We are one of a few states that actually has that in our Constitution, is that we guarantee a constitutional right for our students to have a basic education. And so that was the North Carolina Supreme Court just making that clear. So in 2004, the Supreme Court held that at-risk students had been denied the right to a sound basic education. So that kind of put things in motion as to, okay, well, we have now all agreed that they've been denied this right. What are we going to do about it? So in 2016, Judge David Lee was assigned to the case when the original judge, Judge Manning, stepped down after 19 years. And so at this point, I guess Leandro kind of was revitalized and got a little bit of a new look with a new judge. So in 2017, Governor Cooper created the Commission on Sound Basic Education, which some of us call the Leandro Commission, to specifically address the Leandro case and really put into motion what we're going to do about it as a state. So then in 2018, the court appointed WestEd, which was an independent consulting group, to recommend specific actions that the state needed to comply with Leandro. So we're all educators, we all love checklists. So that's what WestEd was hired to do, was basically create a checklist of, okay, what are the specific actions that we as a state need to take to ensure that we are meeting this state constitutional right. So in 2019, WestEd releases the report detailing the problems and various solutions. That was a big report when it came out, and basically that laid the groundwork for the parties in the case to actually propose a solution based on this independent consultant's findings. And so in 2020, Judge Lee orders both sides of the case to do just that, is to present a short-term plan for the state with more in-depth plans to follow. So bringing us up to the present, on March 15th, 2021, this year, a comprehensive remedial plan was submitted to Superior Court by the State Board of Education and the Department of Public Instruction. This is a 52-page plan, so I didn't, outline all of it, but it basically lays out a long-term plan through 2028 so that all students in the state will have access to a sound basic education by 2030. So this particular plan, and I'm going to link it as soon as I'm done talking, I'll link it in the chat box. But basically this plan lays out specific goals such as increasing teacher diversity, ensuring every school has competent teachers and principals that are well supported, increasing state education funding, and increasing access to high quality pre-kindergarten. And if all of that sounds a little familiar, it's because we also have language for each of those in our legislative priorities. So that just shows you that, NCASA and all these other education groups are also in support of this Leandro plan and the overall arching goals that it suggests. So what does that mean for us? Just higher level, where are we at? So the state has filed the plan, as I mentioned, but Judge Lee will need to sign off on this plan. And as of right now, no court hearing has been scheduled yet. So we can still be looking at ways that we want to implement this plan and go ahead and lay out the funding structures to get this moving. And so that's kind of what Governor Cooper has done right now by incorporating so many of the Leandro recommendations into his budget proposal, is that he's kind of laying that groundwork. And I bet Jeff's going to get a little bit more into that when he goes into the budget. So yeah, without further ado, I will let Mr. Geoff Coltrane speak a little bit about the governor's budget plans.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. And Catherine, thanks for the invitation today to join everybody, and appreciate everybody joining us this morning. And just quickly, on behalf of the governor, just want to say thank you to all of our education leaders that are on the call today, and all those that are not. This past year has been anything but normal. And I know all of us have been working hard to try and make sure that our students and our teachers are safe, and that we're able to provide them with the academic resources they need, but also all of those social, emotional, and physical needs like meals and counseling support throughout this pandemic. And I know our educators and our administrators have just done a tremendous job at that. And so just want to say thank you on behalf of the governor for that great work. You know, we're not through this yet. We've still got a ways to go, but I think we can all see, you know, over the horizon, hopefully how this is gonna end. And I think, you know, the governor's budget is really forward thinking and trying to think about how can we sort of build on this crisis and really come back even stronger than we were before. So again, just thank you for the great work that you've done. I'm going to share my screen. All right, so excited to join you today to share information about the governor's budget proposal for the next biennium, fiscal years 21-22 and 22-23. This presentation, which I believe Catherine is going to share out as well, actually pulled from Budget Director Charlie Peruse's presentation yesterday to the General Assembly. So this is part of a much longer presentation for all of you that like to get into the weeds on state budgeting. There's a much longer presentation out there. And also Catherine's going to share the actual link to the budget book, which is about 250 pages of state government budgeting that gets into all types of areas. So you can go into more detail, both on education, but also on other areas of the state budget. But first wanted to start with sort of what were the governor's vision and guiding principles with this budget. And this has really been his sort of focus even during his first term, is he wants to continue advancing in North Carolina that's better educated, healthier, and helps our residents keep more money in their pockets so that they can live abundant and purposeful lives. And so, you know, that's sort of his focus with the budget and with all of his work in policy and programs. But particularly in the budget, he also wants to make sure that in addition to those things, that we're continuing to make substantial investments in our savings reserve so that we are strong in case we run into a crisis like we've seen before. But also wants to make sure that what's being proposed is a comprehensive 2-year budget. The state budgets on a 2-year biennial cycle, and of course we're at the beginning of that. And so making sure that we're laying the foundation for the next 2 years was important for him. In particular, his priorities this year were sort of focused on 3 things, and you'll see all 3 of these in the education part of his budget. Really focusing on infrastructure and resiliency. We know that there has been a lot of capital and infrastructure needs across the state, not just in our school districts, but also in our universities, our community colleges, and state agencies, water, sewer, infrastructure. There's a backlog of needs that needs to be addressed. And particularly coming out of the pandemic, there's a lot of healthcare infrastructure needs, but also needs that have popped up from previous crises like our hurricanes and storms in the past. So really wanting to invest to make sure that we're building back stronger in those areas. Of course, our people are our strongest resource in our state, both our public school employees, our state government employees, as well as our university and community colleges. And so really wanting to make sure that we're making the investments that are necessary in our human capital so that those folks are supported, compensated, but also have the resources they need to do their jobs. And then last, and certainly not least, is making sure that we're focusing on the supports that our North Carolinians need to continue to grow, to thrive, and of course, to recover coming out of this pandemic. So really focusing on the needs of our residents. So I'll start off with probably the biggest headline, and I know for many of you school district administrators, this is probably one of the big categories you were interested in. The governor, as he did in 2019, is proposing a statewide general obligation bond that would actually go on the ballot this November. So it's a very aggressive timeline. But the bond would be proposed to be a $4.7 billion bond, which is about $800 million larger than the one he proposed in 2019. $2.5 billion of that would go for public school capital needs. That's about $500 million larger than the one proposed last year. Obviously, this would be a big help to all of our school districts, but really is just a drop in the bucket in terms of the capital needs I know that you have. Based on the last capital needs survey, there's an $8 billion backlog of capital needs, but that survey is 5 years old. So I can only imagine that number has gotten even larger over the last 5 years. So this is a start, but we know that there's a lot more work to be done, but hopefully it's enough. The design of the bond package for public schools was intended to provide enough for at least a significant project in each school district. So there is a billion of the $2.5 billion is spread evenly across the county. So every county gets $10 million. And then 1.1 billion on top of that would be distributed based on the number of students you serve. And then 375 million would be distributed based on the wealth status of the county. So I do have, and Catherine will share links to this at the end of the presentation. There is a distribution of what that would look like across our school districts. So you can see what your school district would be receiving out of this bond. At the high end, it's 137 million for Wake County, 127 million for Charlotte Meck. And then for some of our smallest school districts, Hyde County would get 10.4 million and Tyrrell County would get 11 million. So, and then there's a range of numbers in between there. So, and happy during the Q&A can dig deeper or pull that information up if people have specific questions. In addition to that 2.5 billion, there's also just under 800 million to go to the UNC system. Some of that is for broader capital and reconstruction needs, and then some of it is specific to healthcare needs across the system, and particularly building a new medical school for ECU and renovating the School of Nursing at Chapel Hill. There's $500,000 for capital and reconstruction needs at community colleges, just under $500,000 for a lot of our cultural resources sites, including the North Carolina Zoo, 430 million for health and safety projects, and then just under 50 million reserved for contingencies. And this is really a pot that we know that once the bonds are sold and the money comes in and you begin building, your school's construction costs tend to rise. So that is built in to try and make sure that there's funding available to help adjust as the years go on. The state is actually in a tremendous position to take on a bond of this type and of this size. The state's got $14.5 billion in debt capacity over the next 10 years. And obviously we are facing right now a ridiculously low interest rate environment. I believe Charlie said yesterday that the most recent bonds that were sold were sold at just under 1.5% interest, which is unbelievable. So this is the right time, both from the state's ability to take on debt, but also the extremely low interest rates that we're facing to really put a bond of this size out there and to make these critical investments, most especially in our public schools moving forward. Next, I'd like to get into some of how the governor's looking at supporting our human capital and our public education. There's significant investments in compensation for our public school employees. The governor's going to invest $289 million next fiscal year and $478 million in the following fiscal year to raise teacher and principal salaries, as well as instructional support personnel, assistant principals, and other certified employees. That's an average of 10% increase over the biennium. For teachers specifically, it smooths out a lot of the salary plateaus. Currently, the teacher salary schedule at year 15 caps out at $50,000, and then it's another 10 years of experience before teachers see a second raise to $52,000, and then that's the top end of the salary schedule. The governor's proposal will create a schedule where there are 2-year jumps in salary beginning at year 16. So every other year there's a raise. In the first year of the biennium, his proposed salary schedule would cap out at $55,500, and in the second year it caps out at $57,500. So a very healthy investment in our teachers and in our school staff in that way. The other thing with the teacher salary schedule is that obviously our teachers have not received a pay raise over the last 2 years of the biennium or a significant pay raise. So obviously making this type of investment is important now, while other state employees have received a pay raise. So it's important to make this important investment. In addition to that, it also restores master's pay for those teachers who have received a master's degree since 2013, I believe was the last year. And in addition to that, there's also a $1,000 bonus in each year of the biennium for all of our public school employees. It's a one-time bonus in each year. The governor has also proposed, and this was part of his COVID relief package back in February, a $2,000 bonus one time for all public school employees that would actually get paid this year. So any public school employee employed as of April 1st, that bonus would get paid for folks who are employed this year. For other public school employee compensation, the governor is proposing a 7.5% pay raise for all of our central office administrators and non-certified employees. And for non-certified, particularly, the governor is raising pay so that all of our non-certified staff can have a living wage at $15 an hour. So it sets a minimum salary of wage of $15 an hour for those employees. We know that there's a lot of non-state funded, non-certified employees. And so the governor's also included money in his budget in recurring dollars to help school districts raise non-state funded, non-certified employees to $15 an hour as well. So not only is it helping state funded employees, but also those non-state funded employees. In addition to that, there's also that $1,000 bonus that I mentioned earlier that is also in the budget for our central office and non-certified staff in each year of the biennium as well. Of course, included on here just for comparison purposes and to help to give you some further information, our UNC and community college employees are also, the governor's proposed a 7.5% increase over the biennium and a $1,000 one-time bonus in each year of the biennium, as well as a 5% bonus for state employees and a 5% raise for state employees and a $1,000 bonus. Lastly, I know many of you don't work directly with retirees, but there's a lot of retired school employees. So just wanted to make sure you're aware that the governor's budget also proposes a 2% recurring cost of living adjustment for retirees This would be the first time in many years, I think, that they've received a recurring adjustment, plus a 2% bonus on top of that in each year of the biennium. Next, want to dive into some of the recommendations the governor's made specifically to help support funding of our public schools. As Elizabeth mentioned and Catherine mentioned, there's a lot of emphasis in this budget on the goal of ensuring a sound basic education for all students. And actually, the governor's proposed budget fully funds the next 2 years of that comprehensive remedial plan. So each of the items in that plan that have a fiscal impact actually are included in their full funding amounts in the governor's budget. He is committed to making sure that the state meets its constitutional obligation of ensuring all students have access to a sound basic education, not just in the next 2 fiscal years, but also in the next 5 years of the plan beyond that. This has been a big focus of his since he took office in 2017. And as Elizabeth shared, he created the Commission on Sound Basic Education and has been working very closely with the plaintiff school districts, the state board, over the last 4 years to really come to consensus on what the state needs to do. And I think it's the first time in the 25-year case that the state and the plaintiffs have been working side by side and have come to an agreement, not just on what needs to be done, but more importantly on the fact that the state has not been meeting its constitutional obligation. And so this is a historic time. There's obviously a lot of work to be done, but hopefully this is the beginning of really making sure that you as educators have the resources you need from the state to ensure that all students have access to a sound basic education. So many of these items are a part of that plan, as Elizabeth shared, and I'm happy in the Q&A to dig into further details on any of this. So, but over the biennium, the governor's proposing a total of $80 million. So it's $40 million in the first year, and then another $40 million for a total of $80 million in the second year to hire more school nurses, psychologists, social workers, and counselors. By the end of the biennium, that will provide 1,000 new positions in those specialized instructional support personnel, with the idea that every district in each year of the biennium would get at least one position. So one in the first year and then a second in the second year, for a total of 1,000. The intent of this allotment would be flexible. So, Wake County might have plenty of nurses, but they need more psychologists, while Hyde County might have plenty of social workers, but they need more counselors. So the idea is that this would allow you to hire based on the needs in your district out of these 4 positions. So a flexible allotment. In addition, the governor's proposing, and this is a critical piece of Leandro, expanding funding and eliminating caps for the allotments that you receive that are focused specifically on serving our most at-risk students. So $230 million by the end of the biennium will be invested in recurring funds in the allotments that serve children with disabilities. And specifically, the governor's proposing eliminating the current 12.75% cap on that, so that you would receive funding for every student that's identified with a disability. Also funding for limited English proficiency, and again, eliminating that cap as well and beginning to make that a more equitable allotment. Additional funding for the DSSF, and the governor's also proposing combining the DSSF and the at-risk allotment into one unified allotment. And then also additional funding for low wealth, the low wealth allotment, and then more funding for teacher assistants, $20 million in the first year and $30 million in the second, specifically with the idea that our teacher assistants in the younger grades play an important role in supporting early math and literacy efforts. And we know that this is a big need, not just on boosting literacy for our young children, but also in making sure that our teachers, most importantly, have the support they need to get the job done. And so that's a big emphasis on the teacher assistants, including the teacher assistant allotment here. $25 million to help with comprehensive assistant for low performing and high poverty schools. This is $19 million, again, over the biennium, 10 million in the first year, 19 in the second, that'll go to DPI to build out their regional and district support for helping to turn around our lowest performing schools and districts, as well as a $6 million pilot program to help school districts begin to build out a community schools model. And this is really to help low performing and high poverty schools connect with community resources that can support students in their schools. And then $22 million on strengthening our career and college pathways. This includes the funding that's needed for our most recently approved cooperative innovative high schools, our early colleges and other innovative high school models, as well as support to the Department of Public Instruction for the Career and College Ready graduate program, as well as funding to help hire more career development coordinators in our schools. They are typically work in the CTE field, but the vision in the Leandro plan, the comprehensive remedial plan, is actually building out those supports so that all students have access to a career development coordinator and can work to develop a post-secondary and career plan that will help them make smart choices while they're in high school, but also really have a plan for once they graduate as well. In addition to those areas, there's also a strong emphasis on recruiting and retaining our best educators. A critical piece of the comprehensive remedial plan with Leandro and from Judge Manning's ruling in the Leandro case is ensuring that every school has a high quality principal and every classroom has a high quality teacher. We know that those two individuals are the two top areas for addressing student achievement. A high quality teacher in every classroom is the best thing we can do to help boost our student learning. And so the governor's budget invests $77 million over the biennium in recruiting, retaining, and supporting our educator workforce, including recreating or restoring the professional development allotment, $10 million in the first year, $20 million in the second, to help school district leaders to provide professional development to their educators. Also boosting, expanding the Teaching Fellows program and the Principal Fellows program. For Teaching Fellows, it would help by the end of the biennium provide scholarships for another 440 students entering the Teaching Fellows program. The goal in the comprehensive remedial plan is to actually be serving 1,500 Teaching Fellows a year to help really boost our educator pipeline. For the Principal Fellows program, it's really providing additional funding to eventually boost the program's ability to serve 360 principals a year. As many of you know, the Principal Fellows program and the Transforming Principal Preparation program merged last year into a single program. So this boost in the Principal Fellows scholarship funding would actually support you as district leaders in encouraging, selecting, nominating folks from within your districts to enter the principalship, and then would support them in getting their degree and their licensure in that area. There's also funding to help expand the new teacher support program to support beginning teachers. There's funding for the science of reading literacy training that the Department of Public Instruction and the State Board are focused on. There's funding for future or further expansion of NCAT. There's also funding to help boost the Advanced Teaching Roles program and make grant funds available to more districts to implement that program. There's also funding to help expand Grow Your Own programs like Teacher Cadets, Partnership Teach, which is out of ECU, and other 2+2 programs that might be in partnership with many of you, as well as a new grant program that is focused on the governor's work on teacher diversity and expanding the diversity of our educator workforce, which was part of his DRIVE task force. This grant program would provide grants to school districts who are partnering with post-secondary institutions and other community partners and really helping to diversify their workforce. And then also funding to help with creation of residency pilots in high needs districts. There's also 1.9 million in the second year of the biennium to help provide support for teachers who are pursuing national board certification. Currently, teachers who are doing that have access to a low interest loan from the state. This would actually provide funding to fully cover the cost, not in a loan, but in a grant for up to 1,000 teachers. And then, of course, I know many of you know as district administrators that there's a lot of difficulty in hiring, recruiting and hiring many of our specialized instructional support personnel, and particularly school psychologists. The Department of Public Instruction and the State Board have recommended the creation of a recruitment program that would help with recruiting those individuals. And so this funds that, as well as providing a $5,000 supplement for school psychologists on top of the salary schedule. So those individuals who are currently in the field would receive the 10% raise that I mentioned earlier, plus a $5,000 supplement on top of that. For you as districts, when you're trying to recruit a school psychologist, of course, the salary schedule plus that $5,000 supplement would be at your disposal for trying to recruit those individuals. And hopefully that salary supplement plus the raise will really make North Carolina much more competitive for those school psychologists that are looking to move here. In addition to the investments in K-12, there's also some very robust investments in our early learning and pre-kindergarten programs. This is also a critical part of the comprehensive remedial plan around Leandro. Judge Manning found back during the trial phase of the case in 2004 that early learning and access to a high quality pre-kindergarten program was a critical component of an access to a sound basic education. So early childhood has been a big piece of Leandro for many years, and we all know that it plays a critical role in making sure that some of our most at-risk students arrive at your door in kindergarten ready for school. And so some of the investments that's in the governor's budget, and again, this is dollar for dollar what's in the comprehensive remedial plan, is it increases the reimbursement rates for the pre-kindergarten program by 16% over the biennium. Currently, the state actually 3 or 4 years ago increased the number of slots that were available for the pre-kindergarten program. But we know from research following that because the pre-K program requires a local match, that there were a number of lower wealth counties that could not access those slots because they couldn't afford the match. And so this tries to begin to tackle that by boosting the reimbursement rate. So the rate of the slot, the money that you're getting, so that it lowers the match that's required at the local level. In addition, it raises the administrative rate by 4%, so that pre-K administrators, this would include school districts that have pre-K programs, have more funding available for the administration of the program. The administrative rates had not kept up pace with sort of the cost over time, so this would help to do that. But really, that's all focused on sort of building capacity for eventual expansion, and then trying to reduce the burden on you and other private pre-kindergarten providers for administering the program. The goal of the comprehensive remedial plan over the 8 years is to actually serve at least 75% of our at-risk 4-year-olds in the NC pre-K program. Currently, we serve about 25 to 30% of at-risk 4-year-olds. And so that will require quite a boost. But I think this is one area where there is a tremendous amount of bipartisan agreement about the importance of this. So hopeful that we can find some common ground on this. And there's recognition across the political spectrum, with the business community, with our educators, about the importance of these changes. In addition, the goal of the comprehensive remedial plan is that the state will fully cover the cost of the pre-K program by the end of fiscal year 2028. So these steps are sort of the initial steps of getting to that, with this raising the reimbursement rates and also the administrative rates. In addition, in the second year of the biennium, the governor's budget proposes the addition of 1,500 pre-K slots. The reason why in this first year the governor's not proposing the addition of new slots is that because a lot of counties were not able to take up the slots that were expanded a couple of years ago, and because of the pandemic, there has been this past year has seen a drop in enrollment. I think a lot of families, because of concerns, decided not to enroll their child. So the idea is that this next year will allow us to try and get back up to an enrollment that hopefully will be much more closer to normal. And then in the next year, begin to expand slots beyond that. In addition to those investments in the NC Pre-K program, there's also $10 million over the biennium in funding to help expand the child care subsidy slots up to 1,700. So this provides subsidies to families or lower income families to be able to access high quality child care. It also expands Smart Start funding by 20 million. It invests 35 million in wage supplements for our early child care workforce. Unfortunately, too many of our early childcare workers are low paid. And so this really will be an initial investment in helping to boost salaries and wages for those individuals. Plus $10 million in early intervention services for children from birth to age 3. And this is for children who have developmental disabilities or are at risk at a younger age. This is a program through DHHS that really helps to support families in getting those students the services they need early in life. And that was a lot, but I will stop here for any questions and to go into further detail on anything. Again, just appreciate the time to be with you and look forward to the discussion.
So thank you, Jeff. That was a great overview of a really good budget. And I'll tell all of you what I said to Jeff when he first walked me through the same proposal. My first reaction was, wow, best budget ever. And wouldn't it be great if we could just wave a magic wand and make this the budget law for the next 2 years and just make that happen right before we all go into spring break? That would be phenomenal. We do have some work to do to make this budget go through the next few steps. My friend Charlie Peru said yesterday to lawmakers, we know this is the first inning of a 9-inning ball game. And so the governor with this budget proposal has definitely come out swinging, and he's looking for a home run. And he probably, if he can get this budget into law, he will have achieved a home run with this budget. So thank you for what you've done to share this information this morning, Jeff. So
Absolutely.
Here are the links that we promised to share. You'll get these in the PowerPoint after, so you can click the links and see all the documents that are supporting the information that Jeff shared with you this morning. We are going to be taking questions. You can continue to put some of those in the chat. We're going to be addressing those. Before we move into questions, I do want to recognize our co-sponsor of this webinar this morning, Education Elements. And here for a word from our sponsors is Katie Rediger. Katie, thanks for joining us and thanks for sponsoring.
Thanks, Catherine. Good morning, everyone, and happy Friday. As Catherine said, my name is Katie Rediger. I am a partner at Education Elements. I know coming off of this past year, we had to look a little harder to find things to celebrate. And for us at Education Elements, it was celebrating a big birthday. We officially turned 10 years old this past year, double digits. And so we are incredibly proud of that. Over these past 10 years, next slide for me there, Catherine, we've supported school districts across the country really in 5 key areas. And that is personalized learning, strategic planning and visioning, equity, helping school systems evaluate and establish a rigorous data culture, and responsive leadership and coaching. So as I said, we partner with school districts across the country. Next slide for me, Catherine. But we have certainly have a strong foothold in the state of North Carolina with almost a dozen current and previous partner districts. So my colleague and I, Jill, work with all of our partner districts in the state of North Carolina. Our contact information is there under our pictures, so feel free to reach out if you want to learn a little bit more about the work we do nationally or in the state of North Carolina. But thank you very much for letting us join today.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you for your support of NCASA and our school leaders. We couldn't do what we do without you, so thanks again, and thanks for your time this morning. Okay, so we're going to move into some questions for Jeff that he's graciously agreed to try to help answer this morning. I'm going to go to those in our Q&A, and you can continue to drop some in here. I know our team has been trying to answer a few of these while the presentation was going. But I will start with what I see in the Q&A, pitch those to Jeff, and Jeff, if you can respond on whatever you can, and if you can't answer these today, if there's follow-up information, we're happy to share that if you need to consult with other team members. So the first one, for the governor's budget, I didn't see where LEA PRC 015 for school technology funding was restored. Did I miss that, or is that the case? Just need to know, since if not restored, then really need those codes available in DSSF or low wealth funds so we can support our technology office.
Absolutely. That's a great question. And it's one I'll need to check on. I don't think that there is in the governor's budget funding directly for that PRC. What I need to check on is if the cuts that were made last year, and Catherine, maybe you know this, if the cuts that were made last year was a one-time, they just moved funds out, but the funding is recurring back. So if that's the case, then the base budget, so that's coming back, the money will be back in that PRC for this year, as long as it's not removed by the General Assembly. But I don't remember sort of how that worked. You might remember, but I can double check that as well. So
I am thinking, Jeff, that was a recurring cut, and okay. so it was cutting 18 million recurring funding, and okay. So one of my finance officers is helping me out here. Alexa Schaus has said it was a 1 year only. So thankfully, right. I am wrong on that, and glad to know that that's the case.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
If I remember correctly, they just shifted it that one time to the school business system modernization plan.
Got it.
That's correct.
And we were saying, well, that's great, but we also still need that technology funding. So.
That's right. So then if that's correct, then my understanding would be is that money will be back in that PRC this year for you to use because it's a recurring allotment. And the way that the state budget works, and this might be the way it works at the local level as well, is that the governor's proposal is just for expansion or elimination items, but it builds on what's currently in the budget itself. So the existing state budget is there, and then the governor recommends new items to that, or expansion of existing items, or the elimination of other items. So that PRC 015, as long as it was not cut previously, then that money will be back in that allotment for this year. But what I can do, Catherine, is just confirm that with the budget office to make sure. So.
That would be great, because I'm sure we will get other questions on that. That was a big area of question and concern when that happened last year. So thanks for checking into that for us, Jeff. Okay, our next question from Superintendent Catherine Gentry. Previous 2-year budgets that were not passed had significant capital project funding for facilities allotted for each district. Where does that stand specifically in this budget? So I'm wondering if she's talking about some of the state capital and infrastructure listings that were in previous budgets.
Absolutely.
As well as you, of course, have talked about the bond proposal that's in this package.
That's right. So yeah, the bond proposal would be capital supports for our public schools. So that would be dependent on the bond being enacted by the General Assembly, and then obviously being approved by the voters. For other capital projects at the state level, there is a significant investment in sort of state capital needs. And let me just pull out my sheet here. It's just under $400 million in upfront cost for repair and renovation funding for state needs. The state does not provide repair and renovation funding to school districts. That requires the passage of a bond, but this would be for state agency needs, including $143 million to the UNC system, $150 million to state agencies, $100 million into a reserve for energy efficiency upgrades and improvements, and then the additional sort of split between the other groups. Just for comparison purposes, since 2015, R&R funding has averaged about $100 million a year. So this is a 400% increase in R&R funding for this year. So hopefully that will help. It won't eliminate, but hopefully it'll help with some of the state agency backlogs in repair and renovation across state government.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And I know you mentioned earlier, Jeff, that one of the follow-up documents that everyone will be receiving is a breakout of how the bond funding would impact each LEA. And so you gave a couple of examples, but there's a specific breakout of how the bond would benefit each school district. And I think that's helpful for them to see. And we'll definitely get that out to everyone.
Absolutely. It's in there's a brief that is in those links that explains all of the capital investments, including the bond, and included in there is a sheet that breaks out how much each district would be eligible for. So
fantastic. Okay, our next question from Superintendent Tanya Turner, which she starts with a comment. I love the emphasis on professional development for our staff. The problem is that our calendar severely restricts us constricts when and how we can deliver professional development to our staff. Is there any hope of calendar flexibility so that we can make this a priority?
Absolutely, and know that the governor recognizes that as a challenge as well. And in the comprehensive remedial plan that Elizabeth mentioned earlier, calendar flexibility is also a critical part of the plan for ensuring a sound basic education, particularly around allowing you to align your calendars with your local community college and higher education partners, because we know that that's a critical thing as part of the dual enrollment in our career and college pathways work. So yes, there's a recognition that this is a challenge. The governor does not typically include sort of policy proposals in his budget that do not have a budget implication. So he is not proposing calendar flexibility in this, but he is supportive of it and recognizes that challenge. I don't know that I can give any kind of indication about what the likelihood of calendar flexibility is. This has been a long-running issue in the General Assembly, and I know one that Catherine has worked tirelessly on. There's been interest in calendar flexibility in the past in the House, but not in the Senate. There was some flexibility allotted to you this past school year because of the pandemic. They allowed you to start your school year earlier. I don't know if that's on the table for this year, but it's definitely an issue that we know is important and critical. Catherine, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
Well, I've been saying to folks that just basically looking at the political landscape and the conversations we see in the General Assembly, there's a lot of focus right now on passage of House Bill 82 and the summer school legislation, which the House Speaker and others have made a high priority. And I do think that if that does become law, then any kind of earlier start to next school year will be difficult. It sort of squeezes out the time that would be available for that early start, which we all think would be beneficial. So we think that is a complicating factor, but then just looking at overall flexibility, that is an ongoing conversation that we continue to have and to advocate for. There is one bill filed, and I don't remember the number, but a bill has been filed to ask the State Board of Education to study making a year-round calendar available as a statewide model for every district. So moving to a true year-round type calendar, which would allow more flexibility for professional development and other things. So maybe a study in that, which I believe there were some Republican bill sponsors who signed on to that legislation, asking at least for the state board to look deeper into this. That may be a good start and a way to really get us where we need to go. So I'll hold out a ray of hope with that, and we'll certainly follow that and push forward and see where we can go on that one. So I'm going to
Catherine, I
stick
will
with,
share, sorry, this doesn't have to do with calendar flexibility, but I think is in that same vein of trying to find bipartisan arrangements. Just, the last 2 years, we have not had a newly enacted budget. We have had a budget, but we've been operating on the 2018-2019 budget with some tweaks over time. But I can tell you, and the governor mentioned this at his press conference as well, is that the governor and legislative leadership, Senator Berger, Speaker Moore, have been having conversations throughout, the beginning of this year on a range of things, and they've all agreed that, for this budget discussion, everything is on the table. So there's no, not going to get a budget if we get this, or not going to sign a budget if I get that, but everything's on the table, including the idea of a bond package. In the past, the House has been very supportive, but the Senate has not. So, I think we still have a long ways to go. As Charlie said, this is the first inning of a 9-inning, and who knows, we may go into extra innings. But at least, there is some conversations happening, which is good. I also think that the agreement that the governor reached with legislative leadership on the school reopening bill, I think really has helped to sort of lay some groundwork, open some doors to the ability of having these kind of bipartisan conversations. So I think everybody's cautiously optimistic that we can get to there. I don't know what that's going to mean for calendar flexibility, but just wanted to share that so that everybody's aware.
thank you, Jeff. And we're getting some glowing reviews for the idea of moving to a year-round calendar for all districts. A lot of our school leaders think that would be great for students and their learning, and as well as professional development and other things.
I'm a former elementary school teacher, and I always thought a year-round calendar would be ideal. So.
Okay, going to stick with a question from Tanya Turner. She had another one, and this is about the bonuses that you mentioned, Jeff. Is the $2,000 that you mentioned is that for all employees or only for teachers, instructional support, and principals? And would it be only for full-time only or part-time? And then another part of that is that $2,000 that you mentioned as a bonus for this year, when would that be paid? We had that, I saw that question earlier.
So it would be the $2,000 bonus. It would be paid for every school employee. So teachers, principals, central office staff, non-certified staff, instructional support personnel. I would need to find out. I think it would be available to part-time employees. I'm assuming on a prorated basis, but let me just double check that. That's typically, I think, how it works, but let me just confirm. The governor's proposal would be, obviously the budget has to pass for this to happen, but the governor's proposal would be if you were employed in a public school or in a district as of April 1st, then you would be eligible for this bonus that would be paid in May. Now, that's the proposal, but that's the idea. So it would be paid as soon as this is passed. So,
and even if we don't have a full budget by then, which is unlikely, we can find another vehicle to put that bonus on and make that happen. So
that's right.
And look for other options.
That proposal was actually made by the governor in his COVID relief package back in February. So it's been on the table for a while. He wanted to reiterate it in this budget as well. So you're right. There might be a chance to try and get that passed outside of this budget, which I think is very likely and would make sense. But so far, we'll wait and see. So,
we're hopeful, Jeff. Thank you for that. So we have two questions that I think are somewhat related. I think at least one of these is from Finance Officer Heidi Kearns, asking about was there an estimated retirement rate and cost for health insurance, including in the governor's budget? So we saw only a line item showing a total increase, but not an actual rate of employer contribution. So is there anything you have there? And then James Beckford was asking for similar insights on the benefit rate increases.
Let me check on that. I know that there is funding to increase contributions to the retirement system and for healthcare. So let me find out if it's a specific rate or if it's just funding that is intended to make the salary increases, to bump the retirement contribution because of the salary increases. So I'll double check that and get back to you, Catherine. So.
Yeah, for their budget planning, those rates are really important as far as what the health rate and the retirement rate. They always like to know that as early as possible because they're building their budgets and working now with their counties on the local funding and then trying to pull everything together. So any insight on those rate adjustments would be helpful. Okay. So that's all the questions I see in the Q&A. I'm going to ask Elizabeth, who's been monitoring the chat, if there's anything else that has popped up that we need to cover before we do a wrap up this morning.
I don't think so. I think we've gotten pretty much everything.
I did see one question from Dr. Reeves in the chat about pre-K continuing to be administered by DHHS or DPI. Yeah. The governor's not proposing a change in that. So under his proposal, it would still be administered by DHHS.
Okay. Well, that has been a lot of really good information sharing this morning. And Jeff, thank you again for taking the time to do this and for taking our members' questions. We just appreciate your ongoing willingness to work with us and trying to advocate for great support for public schools, and just know we appreciate you and all that you do.
Absolutely. And if any other questions come up, feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to give more information.
So we are having someone ask, can you repeat the staff who would receive the $2,000 bonus? They missed part of that answer.
Sure. It is all school staff. So I can read to you what's in the. It provides a one-time $2,000 bonus to public school personnel, including teachers, state agency teachers, instructional support personnel, non-certified employees, central office staff, principals, and assistant principals employed on April 1st. So it's all staff would be eligible for that. And then I needed to check about if it's prorated for part-time. So.
Yes, and retirement and health rates. Those were the other pieces. Okay. Well, thank you all for sticking with us this morning and your attention, especially, as I said, on short notice. We hope that you see this budget as sort of our spring break present to you, because it does have a lot of good things in there for our public schools and our personnel. And I think as this ball game continues, this 9-inning ball game, it's going to be up to all of us to try to advocate for the pieces that we see in this budget that we think are important to be in that final package. So if you see something that you really like that the governor's proposed, say thank you to him, and also tell your lawmakers, look what the governor's done with this, and you can do the same, and we want you to do the same. So let's all weigh in and make a good budget possible for our schools before we open the next school year. So just want to wrap up this morning and give you a heads up on some other events that are going to be coming soon. As I mentioned, today's webinar was the first in a series of free spring and summer webinars we are providing for our members. The next one, we're going to be doing a superintendent only webinar on April 13th to try to give our superintendents a sort of a roadmap to summer school, assuming that legislation has made it through the second chamber and possibly been acted on by the governor by that point. So assuming that does move forward on that time frame, then April 13th, 7:30 a.m. will be a free webinar for superintendents. We will make that webinar on demand, available on demand afterward for other members. The superintendents are leading that planning, and so they wanted to ask a lot of questions and get specific guidance. So that's why we're doing it as a smaller group for them, but then we'll make the information sharing available shortly thereafter to other members. We also will have other webinars in this series of free events we're offering, and so we'll be providing registration information for each of those. Those will be featured in our Thursday newsletters. You'll see registration information there, as well as some freestanding registration emails that will come to your inbox. And we do hope that you can join us for many of those. We're going to focus on things like testing and accountability, K-3 literacy reform and early childhood learning, school safety issues. We have one coming up very soon that's going to be focused on building student resiliency right as your students are coming back into school buildings, many for the first time in almost a year, but they'll be back in your buildings, and they're bringing a lot of social emotional learning needs with them. And so how do we make our students more resilient? That will be an April 19th webinar. So featuring one of our NCASA board members, Dr. Karen Jones of East Carolina University, will be leading that one. So I think that's something many of you would like to sign up for. Hopefully you can join us for that one. Again, we appreciate all you do to lead our schools and our districts daily, and your ongoing connection to NCASA and working with us throughout the year to advocate for strong, efficient schools that provide the services that all of our students across the state need and deserve. We have here just some resource information for our team. Please reach out to any of us if we can be of assistance to you. We do hope you have a great spring break, and right before that, before you get into your spring break, we hope you have a wonderful weekend. Look forward to seeing you all at another online event in the future, and better yet, hoping to see many of you in person in the months to come. So stay safe, stay well, and we will be seeing you again soon, we hope. Take care.